All right, we're live. This is MC1 Gamer, and I have the real Green Knight with me, Anthony from the Sustainable Center, who has agreed to come back to the fold temporarily and analyze Age of Sigmar's Bretonnian PDF with all the war scrolls. Thank you for joining me, Anthony.
I went through one of those gates that the Sigmarines come through.
Yeah, I could see that. So you clearly you didn't roll a 1.
I guess not.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and look at the war scrolls. We're going to take a look at all the different units. If you've seen some of the other unlockings for the army sets, the way we're going to do it is we're going to go through the generic characters, the generic units. If we have time at the end, we'll take a look at some of the special characters. We'll probably have enough time because in previous ones I've had a real time limit. But in this one, it's a much smaller war scroll because it's what, a 12, 13-year-old army. Is how long is it, Anthony?
In the year of our Lord BC 273. They haven't been updated since 2004.
Well, that's terrible. But now, hey, look, for you guys who are Bretonnian players, if you have if you are still interested in Age of Sigmar, you've got your rewrite of your army book. So let's take a look at it and see if individually each of the war scrolls are better or worse for Age of Sigmar versus what they were within 8th edition. And hopefully there are people out there. If you're watching, I don't know why you wouldn't be if you're not interested in Age of Sigmar. But if you're looking to field those that knight army again, you have the opportunity once again. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen, and we'll dive right in. All righty. All right, we should be seeing that. Hopefully, we're just going to stay on that. And okay, so let's go and start off with. I'm going to start scooping now. Are you seeing this as it's scrolling down?
Yep.
Okay, Anthony. Well, look, I know we both looked over this stuff. Why don't we start off with you? Give me a rundown of the Bretonnian Lord and let me know what you think.
So we're starting with the Lord, or you want to start overall with the army?
Yeah, no, we could start. We could do assessments of the whole army, the army as a whole, once we've gone through the whole thing.
Okay. So with the Bretonnian Lord, the big thing with him, a lot of your characters turned into more buffing characters. Again, depending upon how the comp and the balance works out, if you ever have an option to put somebody on a Pegasi, just do it. It's just better. The extra mobility is totally worth it. It's not like you have to worry about hiding that guy or girl in a unit because there's no longer hiding of heroes. So put them on the Pegasi, get that extra mobility. But you're going to want to take a Bretonnian Lord because obviously they have the command ability. But the Lord of the Realm rule is really the thing for them, which allows all units within 15 inches to reroll charge distances. And it was really something I wish they had back in 8th edition. Bretonnia was all about the charge. And although Bretonnia isn't as much about the charge at this point in the game, they certainly get a ton of benefits. And really getting the initiative on your turn is a big deal. So I think a Bretonnian Lord, if you're playing enough War Scrolls, is really a must. The Paladin kind of competes with him as well, again, depending upon how many heroes you're going to be allowed to take in your version of whatever you're playing. But I definitely like it. If you have a 3rd hero slot or more, there definitely should be a Bretonnian Lord on Pegasi in that force, just for the charge distance rerolls as well. Offensively, he's there. He doesn't really do much. You're probably much better off just hanging back with him until you land charges with your lances and try to just keep him alive more than anything.
He's pretty sticky. I mean, he's only got 5 wounds, even whether you have him on a steed or on a Pegasus. But there's some really interesting things that I find. First of all, his move is a lot more dramatic than even the other characters that can be on a Pegasus or on a steed. He's got like 2 extra move when he's on his charger. He's got 16 when he's on his Pegasus, which I think is the same as the Pegasus Knights themselves. But he's sporting a 3-up save. You throw a Mystic Shield on him, he's gonna handle most attacks that come his way. It's unfortunate he's only got the 5 wounds. I would love to have seen something where you could put him on a dragon. That's the one thing I think is missing here. But he can really dish it out. 5 attacks, 3 up to hit, die 3 wounds per with a rend. of course, you still got 2 attacks from the steed to fall back on, but I think the thing that we're really missing here is, unfortunately, you don't have the option to put him on something a little bit beefier.
Well, I wish they gave the hippogriff option. I mean, yeah, King Loren can take it, but a lot of named characters are probably not going to be allowed, or some of them, and you don't always want to run King Loren. You used to be able to put, you would take the King Loren model and just call it a generic, Bretonnian Lord on Hippogriff, and this is the perfect addition to be running that big monster, because it was terrible in the prior editions, and now they took that mount option away from us. I don't really understand the logic there.
They actually didn't. I have it on the screen now. I didn't see this when we first talked about Bretonnia, and I didn't even see this on some of the other War Scrolls, even when I was doing some of the other PDF reviews. They actually have it. This is kind of, in my opinion, a little bit sloppy, but apparently on some of these, like for instance, the Bretonnian Lord on foot, we'll get to that. You just use the Paladin War Scroll, and in this case, you could take a Bretonnian Lord on a Hippogriff. You just use the King Louis, specifically the King Louis War Scroll, and it's the same thing. The Prophetess of a lady, you can use the Damsel, which I guess just means there's nothing different between the two. Paladin on a warhorse, you can use the Bretonnian Lord on a steed, and a Paladin on a Pegasus, you use the same Bretonnian Lord on a Pegasus. So I think the only thing you lose if you have like a Paladin and you use the Bretonnian Lord version is you lose like the command ability. But you can take a Bretonnian Lord on a Hippogriff. I guess I'm not sure how that works, because if you're not allowing, say for instance, unique characters, I guess you don't get some of the special abilities that King Louis has.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as King Louis still. I mean, I don't count the back of that section, right? To me, I put in my notes like a Paladin can't be run on horse. If they say to then take the Bretonnian Lord stat line and call that a Paladin, it's not a Paladin, right? It's a Bretonnian.
Well, it's similar abilities. The only thing you don't get is a command ability unless you call that guy your general. And so, yeah, you can do it. It's just a little bit of a sloppy way, in my opinion, of achieving that goal. They could have just put in another. I guess somebody just didn't want another page in the PDF. I don't know.
Yeah, they didn't want to overcomplicate it. So, I mean, I'm treating it as whatever it says in the entry there. Obviously, just take a Bretonnian Lord if you want another hero character on mount. If you want somebody on foot, I think the Paladins are a really good choice just from a buffing perspective.
Yeah, let's move off to the Paladin, and he's pretty versatile, and there's no reason not to take him. If for any other reason, I mean, the limitation I think that we have here is the fact that as a Paladin in and of itself, he's limited, that he's not on anything other than his own boots with this particular War Scroll. It's unfortunate because he's got that great heroic killing blow, and the only way you get the heroic killing blow is on a dismounted Paladin.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not Bretonnian's characters aren't really taken too much for offense, I think, in this molt, which is a complete contradiction of how they were taken in 8th. The Paladin, you need to take him because he's going to be the main buffing tool for a lot of your stuff, especially to peasant-based units, which I think that's where the synergy lies. Is he's a foot model. You can hide him very, very easily behind intervening units if you're playing your line of sight that way, or just behind any kind of cover. And he just has a radius. If within 8 of this peasant unit or that peasant unit, he gives a buff. And in the game I played him, that's how I used him. He never saw combat, and I think that's how he should be. It's unfortunate you're not going to be able to use that heroic killing blow, but I think, if someone's threatening your lines, he's kind of one of those guys that you can kind of throw out there and just really hope that you score that D6 wounds. But I would say, again, he's another character that you have to be very defensive-minded about where you put him and try to keep him alive and make sure he's within a certain distance of those other units. But I would say if you're going to take any kind of peasants at all, this is the first hero I'd put in my list.
Yeah, he's an auto. Can you hear me?
Yep.
For some reason, all of a sudden, I'm getting my own audio. I'm having a problem with the audio.
I hear you fine.
Okay. I'm going to have to just pull one of these out of my ear. All right. So, yeah, it's a little bit weird because a Paladin shouldn't have to be defensive. You think of him as being on the offensive. I think that maybe they the idea is that he's going to sit with your men-at-arms. So we'll go over that a little more when we get further down the line with the men-at-arms. Paladin Standard Bearer. Let's go over that. Tell me what your thoughts are on the Paladin Standard Bearer.
I thought he kind of sucked. +1 bravery to all units within 15. +1 is not a big deal. It's one model. I guess if you were talking about a Grail Knight unit, something that you may have a smaller count on, depending upon, again, your comp. But you could just do the immune to battle shock from a Bretonnian Lord, right? So you don't really need that. He has something similar to the Lord's ability, the Follow Me to Glory, but he needs to land the charge successfully himself to kind of trigger that. So I would just say the Lord's just a better choice. I mean, I would not really condone taking him if you're trying to make the most optimal choices.
Yeah, it seems like he's just a dumbed down version, but it's just a war scroll for the sake of taking what used to be the Battle Standard Bearer. The only thing I could say is that you're not restricted unless you comp heavily or unless you're in a comp environment by taking multiples of these. And it always has been the case where the Bretonnian army seemed to really favor taking more heroes, to taking more characters, especially with the character wall. I think that if you're talking about a comp environment, one of the things that kind of bothers me is where you have comp that where people are restricting very heavily monsters and hero choices. And I think there are some armies that really, really suffer from that, and unnecessarily so. And I think that the Bretonnians are one of them, because I think that you could take more of these characters, and just like in 8th edition, you would have been able to flesh out your army a little better. And I have to just say to anybody out there who's looking at organized tournaments, in the same way I've said it in previous, if you're looking to comp in some way, give people options. And it should not just be simply 0 to 2 heroes. Don't limit it in that respect, because there's certain armies that it's not fair to. If you want to make it a 0 to 4 or 0 to 6, where you have to take it from a pool or try to limit in some other respects, I can understand that if you want to try and keep things, the really crazy stuff, really limited in some respect. But this army really works well, I think, when you have more characters. And I think the Paladin Standard Bearer can have a place in it, but it just seems to be a lesser version of what you could already do, like you said, with the Lord.
Right, yeah, I think he's a little bit more of a force fit, and I would probably want to take more paladins or more damsels. It would just always, unless you're playing a really ridiculously large amount of heroes, if you're limited in any capacity, I don't think this guy sees the table in an environment where you're trying to necessarily be optimally competitive. But maybe scenario play, he'll have, a little bit more of a need. We'll see.
So the damsel, now you got a chance to use the damsel in our game when we were testing out some small units. So just some thoughts and reflection on how she worked and with how she fits in with Age of Sigmar.
So again, you're going to want to mount her on a Pegasi. Nobody really should have a damsel mounted on Pegasi unless they've already gone ahead and made that conversion in the past month for Age of Sigmar, because it just wasn't an option in the last book. Maybe before 2004 it was, but since then it hasn't really been an option. I would say if the Paladin's the first choice, she's kind of second choice in here. Not as important if you're running a peasant horde, but if you're running any kind of knights at all, even just one unit like I had, her Blessing of the Lady works incredibly well. Again, it casts on a 5-up, so you're going to get it off the overwhelming majority of the time. It basically gives them a 6-up save against any kind of wounds they take, and this is before any kind of armor save they would be taking, so they kind of stack. And in addition to that, if the unit's nobility, which obviously all the cav are, it goes to a 5-up. So it's the 5-up blessing pretty much all the time. And even if you're taking just one cav unit, and my assumption would be that you would, because if you're not taking any cav, really, why are you playing Bretonnia? She's definitely the choice to go with. She's definitely a defensive buffing caster. I think she has one very generic, like Lightning Bolt or something, but you don't take her for that. You take her to definitely sling that blessing around on the cav units.
I like her Aura of the Lady ability. You just kind of sit her next to a very important character, and because shooting is so free in this game because there's so very little that can stop shooting, and there's certainly methods that I'm already finding by certain abilities of units in various different armies that really help mitigate some of the shooting craziness that people talk about. I'm uncovering some of that, but one of the things I like about her is that you want to put her next to your general or a paladin or somebody really important in your army. Just by sitting there in your hero phase, a default is that you basically heal a wound on either her, or if anybody's considered free people. Now, let me say that. Let me actually pull that back. Are all the nobility characters also considered free people?
I think the whole Bretonnian army is considered a free people. I mean, I haven't looked at it in a bit, but
Yeah, let me just scroll up here and take a look. Yeah, the paladin standard bearers, free people. They are free people. Yeah, so that would still work. You keep her there, and if you're just getting, if you're losing some wounds, this is just a way to regenerate them. That's pretty good.
yeah, it's definitely, she's a very nice utility play. Again, not as important if you're running a bunch of peasants, but I'm assuming everyone's going to take one cav unit, so that's where she'll come in.
Yeah, why are you playing Bretonnia if you're not running cav? Even with the formation in the back, which we'll get to. All right, Knights Errant. This is, my feeling is that the Knights Errant are a pale shadow of what they used to be. They used to be a less expensive version of the Knights that I think there was definitely a place for in 8th edition for a Knights Errant unit. You certainly could pad that up with some nice character wall with some paladins. You don't have that option to do that now, and I'm just not sure why I would take a Knights Errant unit in this version, because you don't get that kind of mechanic to kind of save points and protect them, with some cheaper, lance hits. I don't know if that eager to impress necessarily is worthwhile, because there's a lot of other elements in the other units that allow for rerolls and addition of hits to roll and whatnot. So what's your thoughts after looking at these guys? Any place for them really?
Well, the fact that they get rerolls, I think, is a big deal. And if I think more along the lines of hopefully Age of Sigmar will keep the Malifaux attitude, which is, we kind of build our list, quote unquote, pre-game after we know what our opponent kind of has and what the scenario is. I think that in that kind of environment where you're building your list on the fly, the Knights Errant have a usage. If you're building your list ahead of time and you're coming with a preset list to the event, probably not. But I think if they stick with, hopefully smartly, that format of build at moment, the ability to put these guys down if you're facing some kind of force that subtracts from your to hit roll. So if you're facing Nurgle, I'm assuming Nurgle, I haven't read it, has some kind of ability where it subtracts from your to hit roll.
Yep.
The fact that these guys get rerolls is a big deal, because the big thing with Realm Knights or Questing Knights or even Grail Knights, unless you use that retarded sing a prayer GRAIL rule, that they don't have a mechanism to get rerolls, and they only get one attack most of the time unless they're ground. And it's like a 3 or a 4 to hit, and a -1's like a 20% reduction almost in your to hit rolls. Well, these guys get those rerolls. Also, if you take 10 or more of them, you're going to get an additional buff on top of that. So I'd say in that capacity, they're successful. But if I had to build a list ahead of time blindly and then walk in, I don't see why I would take them.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because much of what Age of Sigmar is about is building on the fly and countering. There's a lot of strategy in the setup, and a lot of people who are putting out battle reports, including myself, have not really highlighted that fact. We've talked about it briefly, but we don't always show it, and I think that's just made to make battle reports a little bit more brief. But there really is a strong element, at least when I've been getting, actually playing the game. So I definitely see your point. So you're saying that any unit like for instance, I've noticed recently Dryads have that. If they're within range of the woods of the Sylvaneth woods, they also have that nice Nurgle-ish -1. So there's got to be several units that are out there that have that, and this is one way to compete. I'm noticing, and I'm just going to go over real quickly because this is kind of a trend with all of the Knights units. They all have very similar banners and musicians. So the banners typically will provide a reroll for battle shock tests, so we don't have to keep reviewing the same stat line, the same ability rather. And then the musician will allow for rolling 3 dice, taking the best 2 for charges. Now that really, this is running all the way across the board on all the knights, and we even see some element with that with the foot troops. So the Bretonnian army in general Well, it doesn't achieve a lot of bonuses for charging. They're very charge friendly. It's going to be rare that you're going to fail a charge. And with the mechanic in the game where you don't declare against a specific unit, you declare that you're charging, and whatever is in range you can then choose. It gives them a lot more opportunity to do that. With one thing that I definitely want to experiment with, and I have not used this army yet, but I definitely plan on experimenting with it. Lances on the charge get extra roll pluses to wound. If you're charging in the same turn, you get an extra +1 to your save, so that makes you a 3-up. These guys are of course all 2 wounds. Nice move with of 10. It's not bad, but it's going to be very situational, I guess, for the Knights Errant. So those are the kind of things that I guess you hold in reserve, and maybe you might drop it just so that you can get maybe a sudden death option.
Yeah, I think that's the only real reason you would take them is for very specific situational use. And if it goes to just the format of build your list before the tournament and that's what you have, I don't think you're going to see the Knights Errant.
So next are Knights of the Realm, and this always was the cornerstone of most Bretonnian armies. So take it away. Some thoughts, Ant?
So I think, again, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of these guys. If it's all based upon wounds and stuff, obviously your questing and your Grail Knights are just the cream of the crop. But these guys in particular, again, you want large units, so over 10 guys. So take a dozen or more, so that way you have 10 by the time you get to combat. But they get extra attacks. So this is a good choice pretty much against everybody. More dice always, your averages are going to get hit more often. Just more attacks are always better. But I think these guys are really a good choice against kind of a horde-ish type of situation where you need to put on a lot of attacks. But again, you can also kind of leverage your peasants to do that. But this is a much more mobile wing. If you wanted to go all knights for whatever reason, they do throw extra weight of attacks. But again, I don't think it's a very strong showing from what used to be the core section for the knights. Now that it's kind of free-flowing and I can take whatever, I feel like I would want to just take questing and grails, if we're making the list ahead of time.
I got to agree with you. I think the only reason why you might default to taking, like, say, maybe Knights or of the Realm or Errants is exactly as you said. If for instance, you want to take an all-mounted army, but the other reason could be in a comp situation where it's a Highlander rule where you can't take more than one of every type. Maybe if you wanted to go with, you already have a questing and a Grail Knight unit, and you wanted another Knight unit, then you'd be basically choosing from the Knights of the Realm. The thing that bothers me is that you do get those extra attacks, which is awesome. It's a fantastic thing to have, but you're starting with 1 attack per knight, where the questing knights and the Grail Knights, which we'll get to, already have that innately. So yeah, you're a big step down wound per wound. The other thing that's kind of interesting, and I want to mention this, is that with the Errant Knights and with the Knights of the Realm, they each only get 1 attack. So they need to have more than 10 or more Knights models in the unit to get that extra bonus attack. But you get 2 attacks with the horses. And as we all know, with the Bretonnian armies, it was always the horses that actually wound up doing the big damage. And it seems to be even more so in Age of Sigmar. They actually have more attacks than their actual knight himself.
Is that a common thing with all horses, or is that just a Bretonnian thing?
It's a common thing with all horses that I've seen. All horses, now they have obviously a lesser hit, sometimes a lesser to wound. They don't do more than 1 damage. There's never typically a rend, and something that we're going to see in some cases. The rend is a positive. I don't know if that's a typo or not, but we're going to see that when we move down to the questing knights. We don't see that with Knights Errant or Knights of the Realm. When we go down to questing knights, we're going to see that instead of a -1, the actual charger hooves are actually a 1. So I don't know if that's an error. So we'll have to see that if that continues with the Grail Knights. But yeah, they all have 2 attacks. They're kind of mediocre, but the attacks add up. And what I've been seeing in the games that I've been playing is that if you can bring more dice to bear, and this I guess would be the same thing in 8th edition and every other version of Warhammer, you bring more dice to bear, you're forcing more saves. People are going to fail saves, and they're going to lose wounds, and then you're going to start removing models. So it doesn't hurt to have those extra 2 horse attacks per guy.
Yeah, and I think the horses are there to do some of the heavy lifting again against some of the hordes that you're going to be facing of infantry, right? They're going in there, they're doing some extra damage on top of the knights. It's kind of justifying, why would I take this miniature over a bunch of infantry? So I do actually like that.
So let's see some of the abilities here. Virtue of the Knights Templar. Add 1 to the bravery for this unit while within 8 inches of the free people of any free people hero from your army. So this particular unit is buffed, but just as you mentioned before, by the virtue of the fact that you might have a paladin nearby, and I imagine that would probably be even a damsel, wouldn't it?
What it says, a free people hero.
Yeah, let's take a look. The damsel is a free people hero, so even a damsel nearby would allow them to get +1 to their bravery, and that's important because you only got a 6 bravery on a Knight of the Realm. Not great. Let's see. It's a 5 on the Knights Errant.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Knights, I don't think you're going to be fielding large quantities of these guys. They take up a lot of surface area on the board, actually. So they start to get in the way of one another. So even with the more free-flowing movement, it's going to get in the way. So if you're taking a lot of casualties, you're probably not going to have many Knights left, and it's kind of a moot point, in my opinion. In terms of the Knights, I think units no more than 15 in a unit, I think, is what you're going to see. Otherwise, it's just going to be this big unwieldy mess.
Yeah, I actually saw a battle report where I think somebody had like about 40 knights, and they weren't using over bases, which I won't use for my anything that I've already based with the rectangular bases. But it just was just massive mob of knights, and I just think it was way too much. It just wasn't necessary. I think the sweet spot is probably about 12, because I'm seeing comps that are anywhere from 24 or 25. Not many comps that I'm seeing are allowing up to 30, which I think is a mistake. But I think that you're probably going to see the 12 just so you can lose a couple guys and still get these benefits on some of these units. A 15 might be a little bit stretching, especially if you want a really diverse army, but certainly possible. Okay, let's take a look at questing knights. Now I'm seeing this. This has got to be a typo. I got to believe this is a typo.
If it's just their horse, I would say it is. If it was all Bretonnian horses, I would disagree. But if
yeah,
they all ride the same horse. That's the thing.
Yeah, and this chart it has a 1 in here, so I'm gonna say it right now for everybody who's watching or anybody who sees this after the live event. I think you take a look at it. Take a look at your PDFs. You'll see that all the chargers are the same exact stats except for the questing knights. So clearly this wasn't QA'd properly. But let's go into questing knights. Now you fielded these at one point. I think they are a must include. So tell me what your thoughts are.
So again, there might be situations where you're not going to, but if you're going to build an all-comers list ahead of time, I think questing knights are a money unit. If you played Bretonnia in the past, and I'm assuming not a whole lot of people that are new to the game are probably picking up Bretonnia. But if you have Bretonnia and you were lucky enough to have some questing knights, this is now finally, after how many years, their moment to shine. Their great swords dealing double damage against monsters is just a huge thing, and that makes sense. It's a giant sword, and that it's a great weapon, and it should do great damage. In addition to that, they have 2 attacks apiece. So you're figuring you take 6 questing knights into range for combat on a monster that has, I don't know, let's say 12 wounds on it. 2 attacks apiece, math says they're probably going to nail about a wound per guy. If the dice are a little bit in your favor, you could be doing 10 or 12 wounds. You could be, dropping a monster very, very quickly there. So I really like the questing knights from that capacity as well. Also, they don't have the stupid rule where they lose their shield in combat. They had that in 8th edition where the great weapon would be two-handed, and then their armor save went down by 1. You don't have to worry about that. And because initiative's no longer a thing that matters anymore, you're not striking last. So these are all things that are big buffs for the questing knights. They're way better than they ever were in the game, I believe. And I think that, 1 unit is a must almost all the time. Again, if you're building your list on the fly ahead of time and you're seeing your opponent didn't put any monsters down, maybe they're not a unit worth putting down, but I would say you're going to see it in 90+% of Bretonnia unless you're going to see some questing knights.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, I think that when you consider the fact that beyond the monster killing ability, you're still getting a better to hit and wound percentage because of even the Grail Knights are a 4 to wound, a 3 to hit, 4 to wound. Questing Knights are 3 and 3, and that rend also is a great deal. I think that these guys are, there's a huge huge push for more monsters in Age of Sigmar than there was in comparison to, say, for instance, 8th edition. There's just a need and a desire based on the mechanics of the game to at least have some monsters on the table, and in some armies that you can really just focus on a mostly monster list. So these guys are going to definitely wreck face if you put them on the table with that in mind. But I like the fact that they're even just by default, their percentages are better for their to hit and rule and wound rolls. Not even discounting some of the other buffs that we're gonna see further down the list. So the one now mind you, this is one other thing before we leave questing knights. Questing Knights are the prettiest knights, in my opinion, on the table. I mean, you can make an excuse for Grail Knights. I think they're a little too, flurry in some of the extra stuff that you see on the Grail Knights. But I've always thought the Questing Knights were absolutely the best looking models. I thought the banner was awesome looking too. So it was always an expensive kit to get, and I actually converted my own from the plastic kits for my Mausolin Hex Wraiths. They're supposed to be undead, basically, ethereal questing knights. So you can make your own. They're kind of hard to find and they're expensive. I think they're going to be even harder to find and even more expensive now unless a new kit comes out.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely the most unique looking. I mean, even the Grail Knights, all their capes were the same. They all had the Grail on there, and there's just Grail crap everywhere. The Questing Knights were very unique. They all had individual doohickeys and chests and stuff on the back, and they're actually a really good kit to, if you're a converter, go ahead and convert with a lot of extra bits. And in addition to that, you can do some really interesting stuff with the tapestry and the tabards on the sides of the model, because technically they give up everything to go on the quest. At least that's what the old lore was. So they would give up their land and their liege and their titles, and it would be, come back with your shield or on it, come back a Grail Knight or come back dead. Almost all of them came back dead. But, you could really strip these models down and make them pretty bare like they're on the quest.
Yeah, I think if there's one unit that I have to pick that did well in Age of Sigmar, it's the Questing Knights. But we'll get to some of the other units that I think have done better. Overall, I think that when you look at just the mounted units for the Bretonnians, these are definitely the ones that have improved the most.
Okay. Yeah, by far.
Grail Knights. Okay, so Grail Knights, the apex of the Knights, I guess, unless you consider the Pegasus Knights, but the ones that everybody always wanted to field, but you just couldn't always fit it into your army. It just.
I never had a problem.
Really?
All my lists had 9 Peg Knights in them.
Oh, Peg Knights. I'm talking about Grail Knights.
Oh, Grail Knights. Oh, okay. I heard Peg Knights. So I got excited.
I was saying with the with the exception of maybe Pegasus Knights, this was the unit that most people wanted to field.
Oh, yeah. I don't think there were 9 living Grail Knights when the end time started. So there's a reason why you never saw any.
Oh, beyond that, they were just way overcosted in 8th edition.
Yeah, they didn't deliver. That was their issue.
Yeah, the living embodiment of the lady, or what are they supposed to be considered?
Yeah, they're supposed to be living saints who lived like 300 years, but they died just as easily as an errant knight, because they were all still toughness 3 with the 2 up.
I would have liked to see these guys with 3 wounds apiece. I would have liked to see them a little bit more buff, beefy, but they didn't go that route. The thing that really is big about them is they have the Grail shields and the Grail Vow. So what you're getting a +1 to save rolls in combat, and if you charge. Now, okay, that's nice. That is nice. You're going to get that on the charges. You're going to get, as long as your unit doesn't, degrade to the point where, it gets wiped out, you're going to get more than 1 charge with this unit typically. I think that, 3+ save is very respectable, especially considering the propensity for Rens in the game. And then re-rolling failed to hits is also nice. But of course you've got to do that cheesy, to the lady with the cup. And you know what? Hell, it's on the page. I'll do it every time. Honestly, the way I'm playing it and the way I play it with everybody that I've been playing so far is you don't have to do the cheesy stuff. You just take the roll. So the other way to go would be to comp out all the silly rules. I think just leave the damn rules in, and you don't have to do your little dance and and shuffle. And that's that, because I think it's it gets a little tiring, I think, after a while.
I think that if you don't keep that rule in there for the Grail Knights, and it's not a big deal, right? It's not like a Greasy's Gold Tooth kind of crazy. It's what makes them. I think if you take that out, I don't really see a huge reason why I'm going to take Grail Knights, to be honest with you. I don't see enough uniqueness in there, And if a comp system comes along, the Grail Knights are going to be hit pretty hard, I think. So, leave it alone. I don't think they're going to be too big of a threat. Honestly, they're a good unit, but they're not a god unit. They're not like Blood Knights, right? So
yeah, they should be like Blood Knights. They really should.
They should be pretty close, but they're not.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. I think they missed a couple of things, which I guess we could talk about when we wrap up the entire army. There's some really good things they've done in this army in this PDF conversion, but there's some things I think they missed opportunities on as well. Okay, so this is obviously your favorite, and I've seen you just do incredible things with Pegasus Knights. So you can have at it with Pegasus Knights.
So the big thing with Pegasus Knights is you can double dip in the attack phase. You can pile in and make attacks twice, as far as I understand the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on top of flying, which everyone got way more mobile in this game than they were in 8th edition. And Pegasus Knights were dominating the movement phase back then. And the disparity between how much extra maneuverability these guys get compared to 8th edition, compared to their peers, is less. But I mean, the ability to fly when you can have models just materially covering the board, that flying ability is really good. They can get in on a flank. They can hit once. They can hit twice. I think these guys are really going to be good as, again, small units like I used to run the min size. I think it's still 3. Mm-hmm. And you take these guys and you run them against enemy characters. They still hunt war machines. They still hunt enemy heroes. They're a great unit to drop behind enemy lines and then go, wizard hunting, to go hero hunting. And that was one thing they couldn't do back in the day, because your heroes and your buffing characters would be buried in units. You couldn't kill them. And then the super combat lords were ridiculous. They went before you. They just killed you. Now it's a little bit more balanced. 3 or 4 Pegasus Knights, they have a decent chance of finishing off a wounded, superhero. They definitely can drop a wizard or, something, 5 wounds or less in one consecutive turn. And, I think that's where they're gonna shine.
I think it cannot be ignored in any way, the fact that they have 4 wounds a pop. They have so much more sticking power than they did before. The fact that you have a 4+ save that can go to a 3. The fact that all the things that you said, absolutely, I agree with 100%. You could keep them at 3 models. That's 12 wounds. You could max them out and go, and double that. I would probably take them at 4 a pop, because then you can afford to lose 1 if you take some real serious damage. If somebody focuses a war machine. The thing that I think that, and this goes to the tactics of Age of Sigmar as well. The thing that people have to remember also is, beyond the fact that they have a 16-inch move, they also have fly, and the key with fly is retreating. If you could take a unit of 4 of them, you could certainly do 3. Take a unit of 4, you can survive a charge into a battle, take plenty of wounds, and lose one whole night, still not lose the real integrity of the fight with 3 remaining Pegasus Knights, and the next time chance and opportunity you get, you can retreat out away from combat, be able to clear away from being within the threat range of enemy units, and then continue on your way on your journey towards taking out, like you said, rear area characters that are buffing and war machines and wizards. These guys are phenomenal. They are just as good as they were in 8th edition.
Yeah, I think if you don't have Pegasus Knights now, definitely the time to go scoop them up, and you're going to want those models anyway, because you're going to be wanting to mount your Lord and your damsels on the Pegasi. So no reason to not have them.
Simple conversion. Okay, Battle Pilgrims. Now, I know you have. Last time I had spoken to you and we talked about Battle Pilgrims, I think you had like 3 units of them. I imagine you must have sold at least 1 or 2 of them.
I still have the max unit from 8th edition, which was the Reliquae and 24 Pilgrims.
Got it. Well, what do you think of these guys in this edition?
I think that they're just a little. I mean, they're better. Everything in Bretonnia pretty much got better than what it was in 8th. But that wasn't a very hard bar to clear, because it was from 2004, right? So the Battle Pilgrims are a little bit more sticky. They have a pretty good save mechanism built in there. If you do the Blessing of the Lady on them, I think they count as nobility for that rule. So they have a 5+ to block there. In addition to that, if you add some extra models, I think their save gets a little bit better. I think if a Paladin's nearby, they get a little bit better. So if you're willing to invest your magic and some characters into this unit, it can be a really nice row block that can absorb a tremendous amount of damage. That all being said, it may just be better to take, 50 men at arms or a larger unit of men at arms, depending upon your comp, and using them as kind of your roadblock. They're kind of like iron breakers from 8th edition, right? Was it better to just take these guys that were really hard to kill, or would it have been better to, take cheaper guys, but just take more, dwarf warriors? And I think that's the decision that needs to be made in certain armies. But I think in scenario play, if you have restricted the number of wounds in a unit, this is a small unit that can, survive like a big unit would in terms of the wounds it can absorb. And in scenario play, it can kind of area deny a space to someone who's not a flyer with correct positioning, I think. And again, I think all these units need to be looked at in the context of scenario. So I think in that instance, there's definitely a home for them.
These are the closest you're going to get to, say, dismounted knights, and without giving away too much of the tag on our review of the entire army. I think one of the biggest mistakes was that we didn't see any new units, at least not so far, for Bretonnia, in the form of, for instance, dismounted knights. But in terms of battle pilgrims, I think that as far as having a defensive type unit, or a unit with a little bit more defense that is not as mobile, but you can get more guys, the fact that you got, you have a 5-up save, not so great, but you can reroll ones, and you can reroll 1s and 2s if you have the GRAIL Reliquary. Now, that means that you're only failing basically armor saves on a 3 or 4 if there's no rend involved. That's pretty good. All right, that's not so bad. And I like that the GRAIL Reliquary has a few extra wounds, but I don't think that that's going to survive very long. I think you're going to need to put that thing right in the middle of the mob, whether it's in a block formation or a cluster, and make sure that anything with 2-inch range is not going to be able to get to it. You're going to need to be able to protect that GRAIL Reliquary. So make sure you do that if you take these guys. All right, men-at-arms. I could see a lot of opportunities for men-at-arms. I think they are vastly more effective than they were in the previous edition, and I think there was certainly a merit for taking them in the previous edition, unless you wanted to go all cav. So give me some thoughts on men-at-arms.
Well, I took a big unit of 40, and again, you were saying some things are being capped at, less than 30. I think this unit shines with a bunch of bodies, 30 or more with a paladin. I think they were hitting on like 2s.
Yep.
And they were ranked up just like traditional 8th edition on 20 millimeter bases. And that was still getting me, quite a bit of attacks. So these guys, hitting on 2s, nothing can be denied off of that. They wound on a fairly decent number as well. And they're just the blob unit that you can put down to area deny. That's going to hit really well, where other blob units kind of struggle to, I believe, hit. I haven't looked at everything, but I think some of the other blob units like goblins or Skaven or things may struggle to hit well. These guys hit really well, and I think that's the really big saving grace with them. I think you need to have a paladin within 8 inches of them, though, to really get their worth. If I was playing against a Bretonnian player, I would be sniping that paladin out with whatever I could before I go into that unit, because even one turn of just getting hit on 2s with 20-something or 30 attacks is going to be really brutal.
Yeah, I agree. And I see these guys also with I mean, if you don't know the mechanics, again, we have this up on the screen. The more models you have, the more bonuses you get to hit. And if you have a character within a paladin, specifically within 8 inches, you can add another 1. So you can go to 2 up to hit with this unit, which is brutal. Now they only have a 6-up save. It's not so great. Excuse me. But again, the mechanic is that you get these buffs very similar to many army, a lot of these warscrolls in various armies. You get a 20 up, you get this bonus. 30 up, you get this bonus. If anybody here is looking at comps in your region, one thing I would suggest is talk to your, if there's any event organizers that are looking to put this out. One of the suggestions I have is to try and make it the best of both worlds. If you want to have some kind of comp to limit things, one of the things I've been suggesting, I'm talking to some local stores about events I'm looking to organize, is if you have a range of scrolls that you can take. Maybe if you take more than 20 in a scroll, if say you have to use another of your scroll allotment. Let's say the event says 8 to 12 in your scrolls. Let's forget about wounds for a second, but you 8 to 12. And if you want to take, you can only take, say, 20 or 25 max. If you take more than that, it eats up another one of your scroll allotment. That way, at least you given some flexibility. If the comp is, if there is going to be comp for this, that you can do something like max out or really build a meaty men-at-arms unit and get those benefits. I see the same thing with zombies and skeletons and the vampire counts. It's just as important with the men-at-arms, because a 2-up to hit is phenomenal.
Yeah, I really like that idea with the war scrolls, where you might say 25 wounds max per war scroll or 24, but you can combine multiple war scrolls together. I think that's the best of both worlds. People have very large units of 40 to 50 or more for a lot of these crappy units that were in 8th edition. And again, these units, they're paper tigers. Men-at-arms are great on paper if you have 30 or more models by the time you swing and you have a paladin nearby. If we're talking about a unit of 24 men-at-arms, you better take battle pilgrims, because they're nowhere near as good at in the 20s as they are 30 or more.
And if anybody hasn't seen the test game that we had played, I had about 40 to start zombies that went up against these men-at-arms, and I was losing zombies pretty quickly, but I was able to restore them. And even though I think I summoned 2 or 3 different times another 10 or even in one case 20 zombies to kind of recombine into that unit, and I was losing zombies faster than I was killing men-at-arms. These guys were mowing through the zombies. Now people say, oh, zombies not such a big deal, but zombies have their own mechanic, which I'll get to when we get to our vampire counts, or go take a look at that video. But they have their own benefit when they get to large numbers. Men-at-arms were just doing the job. They were really it forced me to do some serious summoning to keep up with them. For a unit of 40, they really did it against a rank and file type troop with a somewhat similar mechanic. They were doing a better job of it. Okay, this I think is the biggest, most devastating improvement for this army for Age of Sigmar. So Peasant Bowmen, what do you think, Anthony?
Well, if you really wanted to be cheesy, you could take literally nothing but Peasant Bowmen. They're quad shots where it's at, and that, look on the same page and you would see why people would want to comp unit sizes down, because I think if they have 30 or more models, they get to quadruple their shots one time. Mm-hmm. That will delete a unit. On top of that, you put a paladin nearby, they get +1 to hit. Everything's taking braziers, because why wouldn't I? It just says I can take them. So now I'm rerolling ones to, I believe, wound as well. So the unit is just going to be absolutely devastating. And actually, just to remember, Men-at-Arms and Peasant Bowmen both have like some reliquary sensor bearer thing they can put on that allows them to dispel spells as well.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Like a wizard, so each unit counts as that. I mean, I could just throw 4 units of 30 bowmen down, and I mean, if you have a unit of less than 15 wounds, I'm going to kill it. If there's a giant hero like Nagash, let's say, I think 30 or 40 peasant bowmen shooting him could kill him. It's
sure could.
Very, very devastating. I would say it should strategically use, like, I'm going to pick that hero with 10 or 12 wounds and just drop him. If it doesn't have a fantastic save, which I don't think many saves get better than a 3-up in this game,
no,
they're a tremendous, tremendous threat.
Yeah, I just want to hit upon the magic thing before we even continue with the bowman, because I forgot that we mentioned that with the men-at-arms. Really important that both of these units can function as if they're wizards for unbinding purposes, which means you can, just like there's threat zones for movement within 3 inches of any unit, and large clusters of units can really change the board in terms of where your opponent can move. You can do that in this game as far with these units in terms of being able to put yourself in a position to unbind spells, because the spells by standard are limited to 18 inches, where if you first of all, you have to see your opponent. Second of all, you have to be within range in order to unbind spells. So typically spells in the first, sometimes even second turn, just go off as long as you roll the dice. But these guys now can be positioned, these blocks of infantry can be positioned to at least provide the capability, if your wizards are in the back, doing some, trying to be safe, these guys can move forward in these big clusters and be able to now give you now multiple unbindings, even if you don't have multiple heroes to go within range. Now, going to the peasant bowman, there's one disadvantage. And I've already played 2 games with I played 1 game with the bowmen and one game with the high elves. And what I saw is that sometimes you're not in range in the first turn to actually use your special ability. There is a limit of 20 inches, so you don't necessarily know if you're going to be within range that first turn. The second thing is that these special abilities are mitigated if you have any enemies within 3 inches of you. So sometimes the decision is to hold this ability back because you want to wait for a really juicy opportunity. But if that happens, how do you combat against this? Getting fast-moving units close within range, your ambushing units, any kind of units that can pop up on the board through whatever teleportation or movement characteristic. If they're, for instance, the tree men and the dryads can appear out of woods. All these different mechanics that allow you then to potentially get right in these guys' faces. And if you can do that, you can mitigate this. So as crazy as it looks on paper, and it is crazy, I'm not diminishing it. There are some things that can diminish, that can combat it. So look into your army to see what else there is. There's other units that also restrict shooting by imposing a -1 to hit within certain range. Things like bat swarms do that. There are a number of units in different armies that allow that. So there's ways to combat this. When you just look at taking 30 guys and seeing 120 dice thrown on the table one time per game, yeah, that's maniacal. That will wipe out in a gash. That will wipe out just about any single unit probably in the game. But there's ways to get around it if you're savvy and if your opponent is trying to, really find his one shot. If he doesn't kind of take it early, you may be able to try to ruin that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story here is it don't walk into it. I would not push my army forward until I've somehow dealt with the bowmen in some capacity. And even if you just, power perceived is power achieved, if you can get them to blow their load, blow their one shot to save themselves from some menial, marginal flanking force or something to that effect, once they do that, their one-time thing is really their big thing. After that, yeah, it's a lot of shots, but it's nowhere near as devastating.
And they are 1 wound each, and any kind of comp is going to kind of limit some of the, nuttiness that you're going to see with somebody taking, like Highlander rules or caps in terms of how many, wounds in a unit, or, there are things that are going to try and limit the crazy. But I would say if there's one improved unit beyond the questing knights, I think that the peasant bowmen, you must know where those guys are and where you stand in relationship to them on the battlefield.
Right.
All right, let's go down to mounted yeomen. Now these, just like all fast cav and chaff units, their role has completely changed from 8th edition to Age of Sigmar. It used to be that you'd line these guys up forward, use them as redirectors, slow down charges, or kind of spoil charges. Now all mounted units have 2 wounds. So the mounted yeomen have, they only have a 6-up save. It can be improved. They do have shooting ability, 18-inch range, nothing to laugh at. But a nice move at 12 inches. They're a little bit beefier, so they're not going to get completely wiped out off the board. I will say the one thing that's a benefit for these guys, the one reason to take them, is the scouting ability. There's very few units in this game that have this. It's like the Vanguard from 8th edition. And this is how it reads. After setup is complete, a unit of mounted yeomen can make a move as if it were their movement phase. The unit can run when making this bonus move. So why wouldn't you run, first of all? Because you don't have to worry about shooting. I mean, I don't know. I guess it may discount you from the ability to shoot because it is a free ability that still considers, quote unquote, that you ran in that turn. So maybe that's why you wouldn't do it. But the fact that you can zoom them up at 12 inches before the game even starts is enormous, because you don't have that capability outside of maybe an ambushing unit or a unit that's off board.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very underwhelmed with the mounted yeomen, but I was underwhelmed with them forever. So it doesn't really surprise me. They're still peasants. But the one thing they do is they threaten. The one thing they do is I didn't hear anything about not being able to push, really close to the enemy there, where Vanguard's an 8th, where, you had to stay a foot away from enemy models. So you could put them, with some careful and really cheesy positioning, sideways, base to base, to make a long line of them right in front of the enemy. And now you've kind of clogged them, right? If I take a couple units of 5 and I make them in a snake, and, that's 250 millimeters or 275 millimeters of, area denial, you can't come within 3 inches of me. you're going to have to charge me the first turn. I deny you a whole bunch of movement that you may need because you need to get up the board to get to an objective or complete your scenario. And I think that that's where these guys fulfill their quote-unquote chaff role still. But outside of that, you know, if we're playing just a regular scrum to kill, they're not a very good unit. Not a lot of people have the old mounted yeoman models, but I mean, you can use pistoliers. There's a lot of stuff out there in the market that you could use to count as mounted yeoman. And so many people have seen so few of the actual mounted yeoman that they would probably believe they're actually mounted yeoman.
I would not recommend that people play the standards like lineup in battle game. Play scenarios. It's a whole other video I'm going to put out. But in terms of, you know, scenarios, you don't just do the scrum because then that's when everything coalesces in the middle. I have to agree. It's very hard to have a regular battle line in Age of Sigmar as opposed to 8th edition. Scenarios will change things, but these guys, yeah, I would take them. I would take them for exactly the reason you mentioned. I think that they fulfill that role as good as any unit that would do that, and especially because they're mounted. Okay, now this was another crown jewel of Bretonnia, and I don't think that they're any less powerful in Age of Sigmar versus 8th edition, the Field Trebuchet. So take it away, Anthony.
I think that when you're seeing 1 to 2 heroes, I want to see more because of the trebuchets. You know, one trebuchet can realistically one-shot a character a turn. Not a super 12 wound character, although technically, mathematically it could. But those, you know, 5 to 6 wound characters, absolutely. It can move and shoot now. You know, you can push it and it'll move and shoot. It gets 2 shots now. It can be immune to battle shock if you have a paladin nearby, which can also be the paladin standing nearby your men at arms and your bowman if you really wanted to like kind of castle up in a corner. It doesn't require line of sight. It has 48-inch range when other stone throwers have 36 or less. It does it all, in my opinion. It does it all very, very, very well. And, you know, I would say that if there's one thing I'm worried about in shooting in this game, it's something along the lines of a trebuchet. These things are murder machines. And the real goal is to shoot at lone heroes, I think, in my opinion. Yeah, they can do wounds to units, absolutely, but that's not their gem. Their gem is elite, very elite units with small model counts. Heroes are definitely where they're going to be targeting at. And I think that this is one of the things people will point to and say, you know, shooting is a little over the top here. We need to do something about it. I think the trebuchet is at the tip of the spear of, you know, maybe that problem.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that you don't have to have line of sight. The mechanic for hard to miss, if the roll is less than the number of models in the target unit, you know, it doesn't have to hit. So if it's a big unit, you're just going to roll wounds. But yeah, you're character sniping or monster abusing, because monsters, look, you're going to die 6 wounds, 2 attacks. You got a 4 up. You're probably going to hit with 1. You have a really good chance to wound with at least that 1. You have a -2 rend, so armor saves are going to be really, really diminished. And that die 6 wounds is just a massive threat. You know, okay, you might roll a 1, but you also might wipe out a character, or at the very least, you might drop a monster level character a couple rungs down the ladder in terms of its effectiveness. The Field Trebuchet is phenomenal. I definitely think that it's there for a reason, to kill those characters. But while I don't think shooting is out of control, because I definitely think that we're still just not seeing the evolution of countering it yet in a lot of the battle reports, I think it's definitely a good reason for anybody who's looking at comp, whether you're organizing it or you're part of an area where they're looking to do it, where you just don't do the 0 to 2 heroes, because by turn 2, you're not going to have any heroes left on the board on either side, because both sides are going to be taking these ridiculously powerful, you know, machines. Everybody's going to have some kind of machine like this, even though this is probably one of the best. I do believe that in a comp environment, I'd like to see a wider range of options for heroes because of that kind of situation, because of many other situations, of freedom to make a choice. But let's put it this way: whatever hero is on the board, they should be shivering in their boots or whatever they're wearing because of the Field Trebuchet, because that's going to be looking and eyeing them. All right, let's take a look at these 2 formations. All right, Defenders of the Realm, pretty standard Bretonnian formation.
I think these are both trash, but you can talk about them.
You know, they don't seem to do a lot. They don't seem to do a lot for you. They give you a little bit of extra bonus. I wouldn't even look at the peasant militia, to be honest with you, unless you were looking for something that's a little bit of a different flavor.
I think the only way you'd want to do this is if you're doing an event where you're just allowing one of these special formations, and that's your army as an akin to balance. But then, in all honesty, why would I bring Bretonnia out to it? Because some special formations, like the Wood Elves one for the tree stuff, is ridiculous. And then you have the Bretonnian one, which is like, I just could have, you know, made a better list myself. So I don't like it. They're very fluffy and they're very flavorful. So if you're playing casually and you want to have some semblance of balance, you know, no one should scoff at if you bring these formations. But they're just not. They're not optimizing what we're trying to do with Bretonnia here.
Yeah, and one of the things I've seen in some of the, in my opinion, smarter comp scenarios for some organized events I've been looking at, just to get ideas, is they're allowing some of their own limitations for maximums on, let's say, characters or monsters to be superseded if you complete a formation. So if you take a formation that allows you to take like 3 monsters, it's legal because you're achieving that. You're not limited in formations as long as you don't exceed whatever other comp scenario might be there. Obviously, you know, if there's no comp, you don't have to worry about any of this, which I think the game has mechanics for. But I think a lot of people are looking to comp in the organized sphere at their local stores. And when you look at that kind of a situation, 1, you're going to have limits on war scrolls in terms of the total that you can take, and 2, you're going to have limits on wounds. Now let's take a look at Defenders of the Realm. I like that you have some of the bonuses you get from the Form of the Lance and the Virtuous Stoicism, but let's take a look at what you need to take in order to achieve this particular formation. You need a Lord, a Standard Bearer, a Damsel, 3 units of Knights, 1 unit of Errant Knights, 1 unit of either Questing Grail or Pegasus. That's a lot of wounds and a lot of war scrolls. And in some other cases, you could take maybe 4 or 5 or 6 war scrolls, and the amount of wounds you could take in some of those units were not so great. You could take 3 on some of them, even 1 on some of them. You know, and here you need that's over 100 wounds I'm seeing here in order to qualify for Defenders of the Realm. Now, I love the idea that you could take these. You can have big games, sure, that's great. But I would love to have seen a couple of modest formations that allowed you to have freedom to add on to those formations with additional units, additional war scrolls. And I don't see that here. I'm really kind of disappointed.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't play to a skirmish mentality. It doesn't even play to a new player because of the amount of models. It looks very much like something I'd have to take an 8th. You know, big giant army, all these requirements, and the incentive for that is just pathetic.
It's like your entire army.
Right. It's basically fielding my army, a worse version of it, and I just don't. I think they kind of gave up when they got to writing this part of the book.
And mind you, I'm not saying that the Bretonnian army isn't good. I think it's great, and we'll get to that in terms of an overall review and some summations. But these formations are just not doing it any justice. They're not giving you anything new or great. There's so much that you have to do in order to achieve them. It's a little crazy. And the peasant militia, look, excuse me. I think the peasant militia is nice if you want to make it as a component of your army. I don't think you're just going to take the peasant militia. I think you're going to take the peasant militia and a few units of knights, because you're going to achieve the qualifications for peasant militia: 2 units of men at arms, 2 units of bowmen, 1 unit of battle pilgrims, 1 paladin. And you know what? You're probably going to have enough room unless you have 20 or 30 or 40 of each of these units. You're probably going to have enough room for maybe a unit of knights. But still, it's a lot to ask in terms of numbers of wounds and the volume of troops. You're not going to have more than maybe 1 unit of knights, unless you have a game that's big enough to warrant it. I just don't see why you would go and ratchet it up in order to achieve that. I could see much better combinations for Bretonnia that don't even include either of these.
Yep, totally agree.
Okay, we can talk about special characters if we have enough time. I don't know how much time you have.
They're not really that special.
All right, King Louis.
I was impressed with him. You never take battle shock tests with him, which is it's definitely good. But again, see the War Machine section. This guy's going to get annihilated. You're probably also going to pay a lot in comp land for the simple reason that he's a named character, and poo-poo named characters. Compland has forever always hated them, and he's gonna get comped harder than what he really should be. He can unbind spells like a wizard. Sounds great on paper. He'd be great in another army with that shield, but Bretonnia is tripping over that with their peasants being able to do that already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a repetitive thing. He can reroll fail to hits against heroes and monsters. Really nice ability there. And add +1 to your hit rolls for nobility if they charge that turn. The charging contingency really just makes it not so good. He's all right. He's just, I think he's very vulnerable. He's a big model, so he's going to be hard to hide. I'm not a huge fan of what he delivers for what he's probably going to have to pay in any kind of comped environment.
Yeah, and you can take his exact stat, ability line for instance, a lord, a generic lord on a hippogriff, but it's the same thing. Like you said, it's King Louis, and I'm sure that if anybody's going to comp out uniques, they're probably going to have a mechanic where it's the same thing. It's what would you care that it's just called a Bretonnian lord on a hippogriff as opposed to King Louis? It's the same stats, it's the same ability line. So yeah, he's not, look, 10 wounds, it's nothing to laugh at. It's a high level wound count. I would like to have seen him go up to 12. There's nothing that big in the Bretonnian list. I mean, this is the biggest thing you have in the Bretonnian list in terms of total wounds. Bless you.
Yep, thank you.
And I like the idea that he's also very good against heroes and monsters. I like that he kind of he gives bonuses to any of your knights, any of your nobility, which is going to be your knights that charge. It's underwhelming. It's good. I would include it. I obviously in a free in an open game. I wouldn't have any problem with King Louis versus other uniques. I just don't think he's that over the top, and that's kind of sad.
Yeah, for the whole thing of Bretonnia, he's always been lackluster. I know he's, more of a figurehead than anything. He's certainly not a Karl Franz ever in whatever version of Warhammer you kind of looked at. The original King of Bretonnia was always the one who took favor. Even in the end times, this guy went off and kind of died. But for the Bretonnia's last rewrite ever, it seems it was a woeful display.
Yeah. Fey Enchantress.
I think she's going to be your best wizard, right? She has the Grail Guardian rule, so Grail Knights can reroll fail hits within 10 inches, which is really stupid because for free you can just reroll for the lady if you say that with a cup. So I don't see the purpose of that rule. She can heal D3 wounds off a model within 6. That's a huge ability as well, and I think that's where her main play is going to be. She can also... her castings are more powerful. She can unbind 2 spells a turn. She can cast 2 spells a turn. Again, she's the best wizard in Bretonnia, and that's kind of her story. But again, she's on a very big model, very hard to hide, and, is going to be a major target. And again, carries that whole special character bells and whistles. We're going to comp the hell out of this kind of model. So I just don't see a whole lot of value to getting her in your list.
And she's only 5 wounds. I mean, she's on a unicorn.
Yeah, five wounds is that's it's totally not worth it.
Yeah, like any other hero. The best looking model, in my opinion, in the Bretonnian list, and I think he is profoundly weaker in Age of Sigmar. Unfortunately, I have 2 of these. I'm using one as a conversion, and another one I was just going to use as as the Green Knight if I ever fielded him. I'm thoroughly disappointed in his ability in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, you can summon him. He's in a good ambushing unit, but by the time you get him on the board, your mounted yeoman or your Pegasus Knights or your flying lord on Hippogriff or a lot of things can get into the backfield and start wrecking face. And that was the exact same problem that the Green Knight had in 8th edition, which was he was this great model. He was very hard to remove. But for what you paid for him in 8th, your Pegasus Knights could have gone back there and dealt with it, or your Trebuchets can just shoot it. So I don't see him being, all the Bretonnian special characters have always kind of been meh choices, and he's another meh choice.
again, 5 wounds. The ethereal has been neutered heavily in Age of Sigmar. So anybody who doesn't know, it no longer is. There's no magic weapons. So everything wounds, all ethereals. The only thing you don't get if you're an ethereal is you don't get any of the rend modifiers to your saves, which is nothing small because rend is such a big deal in Age of Sigmar. But it's still a step down for anything ethereal versus what it was in 8th edition. And that really also hits the Green Knight. So, yes, he's got a 3-up save. He's not going to take any rends, so it's always going to be a 3-up save. He can come back. Great. He's got a nice move, 12 inches. He can fly, which is also a big deal. But yeah, like you said, is he going to get there in time? Is it worth for a War Scroll slot? He's just an interesting idea in a narrative game, or maybe a specific scenario. He might be worthwhile, but he's because special characters or unique characters are probably going to be the first things that are going to get comped out. You're not going to see him very much, so I wouldn't even consider him. Now, I don't want to be, I want it to be doom and gloom for Bretonnia. I think that this army as a whole is personally profoundly better in comparison to where it stood with other armies and with the versatility that it has within the mechanics of Age of Sigmar versus what it was in 8th edition. And I will elaborate more on that, but I don't think there's anybody out there who's as proficient with what Bretonnia was in 8th edition as you, Anthony. You've been very, very successful with it. I know there's been other people that have had, some GT titles, but if I sorry, I didn't mean to throw that in there. That's not a dig.
Well, no, I'm laughing because I know the guy. So,
but yeah, we both do. But the thing is that I think for over the stretch of time that you've fielded Bretonnia, you've had a tremendous amount of success, and I think you've probably even changed the way some people played the army in 8th edition, based on just you being out there. Maybe some other people might have done it. I don't know if they did it first or whatever, but even if you weren't the first, you probably did it the most, and were the most known as far as I'm concerned. Tell me what you think about how this army plays within the mechanics of what you know of Age of Sigmar versus how it was in 8th edition, and what your thoughts are about that.
So when I think about Bretonnia, it's a very niche army, and it has, it's kind of like that Supreme Court justice or that court justice talking about pornography. Like, I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. I can't define it. That's Bretonnia to me, because they walk a very fine line between being empire and, being, I guess, Sigmarines almost. They were kind of always called, the Space Marines of fantasy, in a very loose sense, that they were this very elite, very noble caste. They had this subservient caste that kind of, worked with them. From a lore perspective, it definitely feels like it's a swing back to the Bretonnia book pre-2004, where, the peasants weren't these crappy guys that you just kind of walked all over. They kind of served a purpose, which I think directionally is what Bretonnia needed to do to become less one-dimensional. The shooting is really a big component. Bretonnia really suffered in that space before. That's definitely been corrected. I think the knights have been toned down a bit. The charge is not as big of a deal, but I think individually the knights have really gained an ability to grind, which was a big deal. It's not just about the charge. They can now stick in that fight with their 2 wounds. They hit and they wound the same with their swords as they do with their lances. So it doesn't really matter if I've charged or not. It makes it a little bit easier to wound. I may get a slightly better save, which are all things they need to keep flavorfully. So I think from a play style perspective, given the fact that it's Age of Sigmar and how vastly different it is in 8th, Bretonnia is there. From a lore perspective, from a play perspective, Bretonnia has been made intact and has been improved. Would I expect to see Bretonnia on the top tables? I wouldn't expect to see them any more than what you saw them in the past couple of years at GTs for 8th edition. But every unit now has a tangible purpose, where before, for me, it was cheapest knights as possible. I never touched questing or grail knights. I didn't touch half the book. Now I can see a reason for each selection, and I feel like I can lean less on my heroes. My heroes can now take a more supporting leadership stance, and it's not all about what do these 9 heroes do for me on the table. So I really like what they did with Bretonnia. It's kind of the little light in the darkness that make me want to potentially, play Age of Sigmar, is that whole fact that Bretonnia is still there and they're still operating the way holistically that they did in 8th edition. So I'm very happy with what they did with it in the scope of Sigmar.
You know, I'm going to hold you to that because I want to see your entire army on the table. At some point, I want to see your entire army on the table, on the other side of the table from me. I'd love to do that. Obviously, that means you playing more Age of Sigmar, which will probably be few and far between. But if that ever changes, you know, I would definitely like to see the host unveiled. As far as the army, I think there were some misses. I think there's many more hits than misses. One of the hit misses was the inclusion of new units, but we haven't seen that in any of the legacy armies. I think that I'd like to think that we're going to see some new stuff with Bretonnia, like we're already starting to see, or there's been hinted at for a lot of these other armies, either rebranding of existing units, repackaging with new battalions and formations, but new units that can help push these armies forward in the Age of Sigmar realm. And I'd like to believe that that's going to be the case. I'm going to continue to believe that until I hear otherwise, because it just seems to be the theme. But I do think there are some misses, and you know, I would like to have seen. You know, obviously, I would still like to see dismounted knights, some different changes, like for instance, something more for the Grail Knights, for example. They're just not living up to the lore, like you always have said. But I definitely think that they are a tougher army in comparison to what they were versus the other armies in Age of Sigmar. Are they the top of the list? No. If you're going to play this army, you've got to understand the mechanics of Age of Sigmar. Understand things like retreat. Understand things like the movement phase. The movement phase is key for these guys, like they've always been, but even more so because things like formations within your units, and I mean by things like go old school with a lance formation. Use V formations with all of your lances, because if you do get charged, you're going to mitigate the amount of attacks that are going to be pushed against your lance, your mounted troops. And then when you get the chance to pile in, you're going to be able to get more strikes back. You've already lost some of your bonuses from charges. You might as well use some of the way you can form your mounted units to benefit you the most, for, you know, if that's the case. But if you do get the charges, don't just sit in your regular 3 wide 4 deep block formations like in 8th edition. Use other formations. There's a lot of freedom for strategy within Age of Sigmar that many people are not putting out there on bat reps. I have yet to put even my bat reps out and my analysis videos out to go over that stuff, because I'm still finding new stuff to add to that every time that I want to go and release something. So I want to redo it. So I cannot stress enough, Bretonnia has so much advantage in exploring those tactics to make it a better army than it even looks on paper. So as much as we have some negatives, I think, to say about this army, I think the potential for this army to do that much better than even what it reads as is there. We just have to really flesh out some of the mechanics of Age of Sigmar.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Well, that's it. Hey, Anthony, you know, thank you so much for doing this. I know it might not have been I don't know how, let me see how I can unshare this. There we go. I'm not sure how, you know, how many games we're going to get in, but I appreciate your taking the time to go do this. I don't think there's anybody who really knows what's under the hood for Bretonnia better than you. And we'll hopefully get to see you on the table in a future bat rep or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.